Hollywood has always sold us a comforting idea. Talent rises, success follows, and perseverance conquers all. It's a story that feels good because it suggests fairness, that greatness will always be recognized, rewarded, and protected. But if that were truly the case, why do so many stars emerge from fame looking nothing like the people we first fell in love with? Why do their voices soften, their edges dull, their fire dim? And here's a harder question, one most people never ask. What does Hollywood take in return for letting someone reach the top? For decades, the public story surrounding Martin Lawrence has been simple, inspirational, and reassuring. A gifted comedian pushed himself too hard, suffered a medical crisis, disappeared for a while, then bravely returned to rebuild his career. It's a neat narrative. Familiar. Safe. It allows the audience to clap, move on, and never look too closely at what might have happened behind the curtain. But comedian and cultural provocateur Katt has challenged that version of events, and in doing so, reopened one of Hollywood's most uncomfortable conversations. According to Katt, the Martin Lawrence of today is not the same man who ruled comedy in the 1990s. Not creatively. Not spiritually. Not personally. Katt doesn't frame it as burnout or illness alone. He frames it as transformation. Forced transformation. So the question becomes, did Martin Lawrence recover? Or was he reshaped? #the Martin Lawrence the world first knew. To understand why this story resonates so deeply, we have to remember who Martin Lawrence was before everything changed. In the early 1990s, Martin wasn't just popular, he was dominant. His sitcom Martin didn't merely entertain audiences, it defined a generation of black television comedy. Every week, families gathered around television screens not just to watch jokes, but to witness a cultural moment unfolding in real time. Martin Lawrence wasn't simply playing characters, he was creating an entire universe. He improvised relentlessly, often pushing past scripts and planned scenes. He created multiple characters, each with their own cadence, flaws, and truths. Shanina, Jerome, Mama Payne, these weren't gimmicks. They were reflections of real communities, exaggerated just enough to spark laughter and recognition. Audiences didn't just laugh, they felt seen. And perhaps most dangerously for Hollywood, Martin Lawrence was uncontrollable. He didn't wait for approval. He didn't dilute his voice to fit network comfort. He spoke the way people actually spoke, joked about what people actually joked about, and moved with a confidence that said, I don't need permission to exist here. Martin Lawrence had what executives fear most: massive influence combined with creative independence. History has shown us something clearly. Hollywood tolerates power, but it rarely tolerates defiance. So ask yourself this. When an artist becomes bigger than the system managing him, what usually happens next? #the first warning shot. Saturday Night Live. The first visible crack in Martin's relationship with the industry came in 1994, during his appearance on Saturday Night Live. Live television has rules, spoken and unspoken. Some are written into contracts. Others live silently in the air, enforced by tradition, fear, and power. Martin broke them. His monologue drifted into raw, unscripted commentary. He touched on topics executives would rather sanitize. He spoke freely, without the polished restraint expected on a platform like NBC. The audience laughed, but the network panicked. The broadcast was interrupted. An on-screen apology followed. And Martin Lawrence was permanently banned from the show. That moment marked more than a network decision. It marked a shift in how Hollywood viewed him. From then on, Martin wasn't just a star. He was a problem. And problems in Hollywood eventually get managed. What does it mean when laughter becomes dangerous? When humor stops being harmless entertainment and starts exposing uncomfortable truths? And who gets punished when that line is crossed? #public incidents and private fear. Between 1996 and 1997, Martin Lawrence's life began unraveling in public view. In May of 1996, witnesses on Ventura Boulevard saw one of the biggest stars in America standing in traffic, holding a gun, shouting that people were trying to kill him. Cars slowed. Onlookers stared. Police intervened. Instead of jail, Martin was taken for psychiatric evaluation. Just months later, he was arrested again, this time at Burbank Airport, for carrying a firearm through security. Hollywood explained these moments away with familiar language. Exhaustion, stress, dehydration, the pressures of fame. But here's a question worth pausing on. Do exhaustion and dehydration explain a man living in constant fear for his life? Because fear, not chaos, was what many observers saw in Martin's eyes during those moments. Fear that seemed rooted, specific, and deeply internal. Fear has a cause. Was Martin paranoid, or was he reacting to something the public couldn't see? And when a powerful figure begins to unravel, who benefits most from the narrative that labels him unstable? ## the lawsuit that changed everything. Then came the most damaging blow from within his own world. In 1997, during the peak of Martin's success, co-star Tisha Campbell filed a lawsuit against him, alleging misconduct and emotional distress. Production was halted. Rumors exploded. Headlines multiplied. The courtroom became a stage where public opinion rendered its verdict long before facts could be fully examined. The final season moved forward only under extreme restrictions. Martin and Tisha were not allowed in the same room. Scenes were shot separately. Chemistry was replaced with camera tricks. What once felt organic now felt fractured. Regardless of where one places responsibility, the impact was undeniable. The show's heart was broken. Martin's reputation was severely damaged. And the industry narrative was locked in. Martin Lawrence was now officially labeled unstable. Once that label sticks, creative freedom disappears. Who controls the narrative when accusations become headlines? And how quickly does public sympathy vanish once a star is deemed expendable? ## 1999. The collapse that changed everything. By August of 1999, Martin Lawrence was still one of Hollywood's most valuable assets. His name alone could open movies, draw crowds, and guarantee box office returns. And then, everything stopped. During a record-breaking heatwave in Los Angeles, Martin was found collapsed after jogging while wearing layers of plastic clothing and heavy outerwear. His body temperature had reached life-threatening levels. His organs were failing. He fell into a coma. Doctors fought to keep him alive using extreme measures, including ice submersion to prevent catastrophic brain damage. The situation was critical. The outcome uncertain. He survived. But survival isn't always the same as recovery. Medical experts quietly acknowledged that such trauma almost always leaves lasting effects. Physically, psychologically, emotionally. The brain remembers trauma, even when the body heals. Afterward, Martin didn't celebrate his survival publicly. He disappeared. Why does Hollywood love comeback stories but grow uneasy during silence? And what happens in the spaces we're never shown? ## the silence that followed. For more than a year, Martin Lawrence was absent from the spotlight. No interviews. No stand-up tours. No late-night appearances explaining his journey. The industry moved on. New faces emerged. New comedians filled the void. Katt Williams believes that silence wasn't rest, it was reconstruction. According to Katt, when Martin returned, he was noticeably different. His energy was muted. His presence contained. The wild unpredictability that once defined him was replaced with careful calculation. Hollywood, it seemed, finally had him where it wanted him. So here's the uncomfortable question. Does Hollywood heal its rebels, or does it tame them? ## the dress and the formula. Martin's return came with Big Mama's House, a commercial smash that introduced a new, highly profitable version of Martin Lawrence. A version hidden beneath prosthetics. A version playing exaggerated femininity for laughs. The movie made money. A lot of it. Studios celebrated. Sequels followed. The formula worked. And Hollywood took notes. Katt Williams claims this was no coincidence. According to him, the industry has a long-standing pattern, especially with black male comedians. At a certain point, success becomes conditional. Wear the dress. Play the role. Follow the formula. Katt has openly stated that Martin once promised him a comeback film together. A true partnership. A project rooted in raw comedy and shared vision. But when the script arrived, it wasn't the project discussed. It was another Big Mama's House sequel. And this time, Katt was expected to join the formula. He refused. And just like that, the door closed. What does refusal cost in an industry built on compliance? And how many opportunities vanish the moment you say no? Hashtag obedience versus creativity. Katt Williams is careful to say he does not blame Martin Lawrence personally. He frames Martin as an example, not a villain. According to Katt, Hollywood doesn't reward originality nearly as much as it rewards obedience. If you challenge the system, you're replaced. If you comply, you're promoted. The dress, in Katt's view, isn't about comedy, it's about control. He argues that many of the most successful black male entertainers have been asked, at some point, to surrender their image in exchange for advancement. Not because it's funny, but because it proves submission. Agree, and opportunities multiply. Refuse, and the phone stops ringing. How many careers have quietly stalled because someone refused to play along? And how many success stories are built on compromises we're never told about? Hashtag what was lost. No one denies that Martin Lawrence remained successful. His films made money. His name stayed recognizable. His legacy, on paper, remained intact. But something else faded. The raw, unpredictable force that once defined him, the comedian who terrified executives because he couldn't be boxed in, never fully returned. The laughter was still there, but the danger was gone. The sense that anything could happen at any moment was replaced with safety, structure, and predictability. And that raises the final question this story leaves us with. How much of yourself can you give away before success stops being worth the cost? Martin Lawrence's journey isn't just about one man. It's about power, creativity, and the quiet bargains made behind closed doors. It's about what happens when talent collides with control, and independence meets an industry that thrives on conformity. Hollywood doesn't always destroy its rebels. Sometimes, it simply teaches them how to behave. So when we watch success stories unfold, perhaps we should ask ourselves one last question. What happens when success arrives faster than stability? And who decides what must be sacrificed to keep it? For much of the 1990s, Martin Lawrence was untouchable. He moved through stages, sets, and sound stages the way other men moved through rooms, with the assurance of someone who understood the geography of attention. He had perfected the art of entrance, the loosened shoulders that tightened the audience's breath, the grin that promised trouble and charm in equal measure, the cadence of a man who could make the ordinary sound like revelation. He wasn't just popular. He was essential. He anchored summer movies, transformed the late-night landscape, and, for a generation, he defined a certain rowdy, unapologetic tenor of black American humor. But even the loudest laughs can cover a fragile silence. And the cracks didn't begin under spotlights or in front of cameras. They began at home. A marriage the world thought was unbreakable. Imagine a wedding day that reads like a press release. 2 successes joined, photographs polished, smiles curated. In 1995, Martin Lawrence married Patricia Southall, a former Miss Virginia. The public loved it because it made sense. Here were 2 striking figures. One, a comedian who had turned vulnerability into a weapon and then a crown. The other, a beauty queen with a poised intelligence and a track record of charitable work. Together they were a picture of black excellence. They were easy for magazines to celebrate, for pundits to frame as a sign that Hollywood was finally, perhaps, doing something right. What we do not always see in those photographs is the small, private slack that forms between 2 people living in public. The timing of their union, during the height of Martin's ascendancy, made the marriage feel inevitable. Success meets success, headline meets headline. But inevitability is not the same as stability. And 2 years later, the marriage collapsed. Why do so many public success stories unravel so quickly once the cameras turn away? The public narrative that followed was messy and raw. Patricia filed for divorce in 1997. Beyond the legal filings, there were affidavits that read like shadows of a person once vivid on stage. She requested a restraining order, saying she was frightened and no longer recognized the man she had married. In court papers, she described behaviors that read like alarm bells. Sudden rage, paranoid suspicions, a need to check corners, the presence of a weapon. She suggested medication and substances may have changed him. The filings were not theater. They were legal documents. But they also changed the story people told about Martin. The headlines shifted from star to unstable. Where once audiences were invited to laugh with him, a new, colder voice reached them. This man had become dangerous, unpredictable. Once that voice took hold in the public imagination, it colored everything that followed. When a person in the spotlight loses the protections of privacy and intimacy, what then becomes of the life they performed in public? Can the performance survive the withdrawal of the private support that made it possible? When the system smells weakness. There are two ways to think about the collapse of a public figure. The personal way, which treats the story as a matter of human frailty and private failure, and the systemic way, which asks how the industry, the culture, and the machine around fame respond when someone breaks. How do contracts, crew, co-stars, and studios react to a man who suddenly appears unreliable? By the late 1990s, Martin was fighting battles on every front. Lawsuits thudded against him. The set whispered of conflicts. Exhaustion wore him down. The divorce was just one of several lines of friction forming a net that tightened daily. Isolation followed. That was the most dangerous thing of all. Ask yourself, what happens when an artist loses his personal support system while under public attack? When the people who could have advocated for him, partners, close friends, trusted advisors, are gone or compromised, the industry's levers of power shift. The safety net becomes a trap. The greats are evaluated like commodities. If a studio believes an actor is a liability, they will distance themselves. If publicists cannot craft a narrative that soothes investors, they flee to explanations like stress and scheduling issues. Labels matter. When the language paranoid or unstable enters the public lexicon, it becomes convenient for executives and commentators to dismiss, rationalize, or rewrite behavior in ways that protect institutional interests more than people. Is it possible that some breakdowns are less spontaneous than we're led to believe, incremental, pushed along by pressure, neglect, and industry indifference? The comedian Katt later argued that the industry often pushes artists toward breakdowns, not by a single act, but through 1,000 tiny exclusions that chip away at their capacity to function. When the system smells weakness, it can become predatory. In Martin's case, the process was messy and slow. He didn't disappear overnight. Instead, the old ease with public performance eroded in increments. He kept doing stand-up. He still showed up for movies. But the magnetism that once felt inexhaustible began to dim in small, telling ways. Fissures in timing, a flicker in the eyes, long pauses that the camera could not help but capture. The long shadow of 1999. There are years that sit like weights in a biography, the ones everyone points to afterward as the pivot. For Martin, 1999 was such a year. At a residential area in Sherman Oaks, he collapsed while jogging. It was heat stroke, extreme, life-threatening. His body temperature soared, and the headlines described a physical emergency. But to fans who had followed his life, the image of a man collapsing while exercising was freighted with symbolic meaning. When a performer collapses in plain sight, people ask, what did the body carry that the performance could not show? For some, the collapse in 1999 signaled a deeper breakdown. For others, it was an accident, a medical emergency fastened to poor luck and poor preparation. Both are true. Physical crises can be accidents and also reveal emotional states. The body remembers the pace at which the mind has been driven. After 1999, Martin returned to the public stage. He kept working. He made appearances. But something had changed. He was functioning, but a part of him had gone dormant. The ease of improvisation, that electric skill of making 1,000 audiences feel seen at once, seemed less accessible. He could still command a room, but the rooms were different. There was a new caution in the way he moved, as if he were protecting a part of himself that he did not want to expose. The shape of celebrity is strange. You can be everywhere and deeply invisible at the same time. Fragmented stages. The 2000s. The next decade was a collage of projects, comebacks, and quieter choices. There were films that shone and shows that flared. There were moments when Martin seemed to reclaim the old magic, and moments when the old magic held only his memory. For the watching public, it's easy to narrativize these ups and downs as a pattern of recovery and relapse. But But those words flatten the complexity. Recovery isn't linear. Relapse doesn't always mean ruin. People can step forward and step back. They can perform and guard themselves. What does recovery mean to a comedian whose voice is both his livelihood and his deepest outlet? Is a quieter career a failure or a recalibration? For many observers, a man walking away from the treadmill of blockbuster publicity is viewed as retreat. For others, it's survival. The long, slow grief. Life continued beyond the headlines. Important people in Martin's life died over the following years, and grief arrived in varying degrees. The death of his older brother in 2020 left a wound that the public watched from afar. Then, in 2023, loss touched him again with the death of a close friend and former co-star. Grief reshapes timing. It can make performance hollow, it can make speech slow, and it can render the eyes somewhere else. We are told grief changes people. But how? It can make a man who has always been quick with a joke slower with words. It can make toneless what used to be a virtuoso instrument. But can grief erase speech entirely, blur awareness for years, and dismantle coordination? Not usually. And yet, it can be a compounding factor among many. The question that many fans asked was not cruel. How much of what we saw in public was attributable to grief, and how much was something else? Grief explains some things, but it does not always account for the totality. And when grief is offered as the only explanation, when it becomes the industry's official line, skeptics push back. They want to know what else is being masked. What else is the label, grief, covering? The 2024 press tour. When the questions could no longer be ignored. By 2024, the franchise Bad Boys had developed a mythic place in the cultural imagination. Two co-leads whose chemistry was kinetic and whose friendship read like an intergenerational testament to Hollywood camaraderie. When Bad Boys, Ride or Die toured the globe to celebrate that history, fans expected nostalgia, high-energy appearances, and the old comfort of watching two comic action figures banter. But in press events in 2024 something shifted. Standing beside Will Smith, who had his own star-shaped orbit of energy, discipline, and intensity, Martin appeared different, subdued, hesitant, sometimes distant. His eyes were unfocused in clips, and his speech came slower. The most striking thing was not that Martin struggled, but that Will appeared to assume a new role, not merely co-star but caretaker. Why did Will repeatedly touch Martin's shoulder? Why did he lean in to whisper reminders? Why did he take over mid-sentence when Martin faltered? The smallest acts, a guiding hand, a whispered cue, a shoulder to lean on, were suddenly visible to the world. On a red carpet in Mexico, video showed Martin steadying himself by gripping Will's arm. The footage spread, not as a joke but as a concern. People watched, held their breath, and asked, "Is this a man who needs help?" When a co-star becomes a public guardian, it creates a new story. It can be a beautiful thing, a friend being present, or it can highlight a deeper decline. The public could not disentangle the two. They were left with a picture of a man who needed support and a co-star who provided it. Hollywood's familiar explanation. The industry is quick to normalize. Within hours of viral clips, statements circulated. He's healthy. It was the lights. The teleprompter malfunctioned. He's preparing for a comedy tour. These responses are often reflexive. Protect the brand, reassure stakeholders, soothe the fans. But those narratives can read as deflection when the footage creates a consistent pattern. Fans and critics alike then asked a hard question. Can grief erase speech, awareness, and coordination for years? The answer from clinicians would be complex. The answer from the culture was simpler and coronary. Something else was going on, and we wanted to know what. The Emmy moment that froze the internet. If any single televised moment crystallized the public's worry, it was the Emmys on January 15, 2024. The reunion of the Martin cast was an event many had awaited. Tisha Campbell, Takaina Arnold, and Martin together again. But the applause and warmth quickly turned to an uneasy hush as Martin stood on stage. Under the lights he appeared disconnected. When it was his turn to speak, sentences fractured. Words came and went like fish in a net. He stared at the teleprompter as if it contained a language he could not parse. Tisha and Takaina radiated the old brotherhood, energetic and steady, but Martin stood almost statue-like, as if some part of him had been etched out in stone. Social media did not react with cruelty. There was no gene of ridicule in the response. It was immediate empathy. Viewers were worried. Many expressed gratitude. Some expressed confusion. The clip spread across platforms, recontextualized into discussions about aging, mental health, the cost of fame, and the moral obligation of the industry to its stars. Damage control. Once again. The next day, the headlines were a familiar pattern. Industry PR lines landed. He's healthy. Stage lights. Teleprompter issue. Fans wanted more than a line. A man with 3 decades of live experience doesn't forget how to speak because of stage lighting. And when the footage of other nights and other interviews all suggested a consistent pattern. Slower speech, unfocused gaze, pauses that lasted longer than would be expected merely from a bad performance, the public skepticism grew. When a narrative is spinning, the human tendency is to choose between 2 poles. To believe the official, comforting explanation, or to sense that the industry is hiding something. Those polarities produce distinct public behaviors. Either protect the actor's privacy or demand transparency. What did Martin himself want? Was he deliberately private, choosing to normalize a quieter life? Or was he in need of help and privacy became the shield the industry used? We do not always have access to what individuals want for themselves. We have only the choices that appear publicly. But the question remains, when a body performs less easily than before, who decides the narrative the public will accept? A shift no one expected. Then the surprising thing occurred. By late 2025 and the start of 2026, Martin reappeared, but this time on his own terms. No dramatic press release. No televised apology tour. Instead, clips from his stand-up shows on the Y'all Still Know What It Is tour began to circulate. Backstage footage showed a man warming up, shadowboxing lightly, listening to music, moving with a concentration that felt deliberate. On stage he was leaner and more alert. His timing returned in places. He told stories with a raw edge. The spark wasn't roaring, but it had returned as a softened flame. Fans noticed. There was relief in the reaction, and also curiosity. Many wondered, what had changed? Were there lifestyle shifts? Different diet, a removal of substances, therapy? Were there new routines? Or had time itself reworked the man into a different shape, one that fit his present life better? Sometimes recovery doesn't arrive loudly. Sometimes it walks back in quietly. One joke landed, then another. A night without incident, a sound sleep, a call from a friend. Sometimes healing happens through the small daily accumulations, not apocalypses. Was Martin Lawrence broken, or merely exhausted by a system that never lets its stars rest? A different phase, not a disappearance. At 60, Martin Lawrence is not chasing the pace of the 1990s. He is choosing smaller, more personal projects. Young Martin, Varnell Hill with Tommy Davidson, Nahama. Stories that are about recalibration, about reclaiming an inner life that felt squeezed by the relentless engine of fame. What if stepping back is not failure but recalibration? What if a man who once sold out arenas decides he values mornings with fewer calls, fewer cameras, and more control over what he will do on days he chooses to work? If stepping back saved him, what does that say about the cost of staying in the spotlight too long? Sometimes survival doesn't look like triumph. Sometimes it looks like a man standing steady again, breathing, choosing what he will do, refusing to be dragged into the machine's demands for spectacle. Inside the machine, a scene. Picture, for a moment, an empty soundstage at dawn. The lights are off, but stacks of cables and a lone folding chair cast long shadows across the concrete. Production assistants move ghost-like, whispering into headsets. A wardrobe rack waits, draped in jackets that smell faintly of cologne and starch. In an office above the stage, an executive flips through numbers with a pen tapping the desk like a metronome. Now imagine Martin alone on that stage. He walks the perimeter slowly, tracing the invisible lines that once made him a presence at the center of rooms. He remembers the noise of audiences as a kind of weather, a sound that both warmed and eroded him. He thinks of his brother, of the laugh he heard in childhood, of how jokes feel different when they no longer have to be performance but can be confession. He wonders, can a joke be a mirror and a bridge at once? This is not a fantasy. It is a way to understand the private scaffolding behind public work. For performers, The stage is less a place of triumph than a place of vulnerability disguised as power. What happens when the structure that keeps the performer safe, relationships, trusted crew, inner equilibrium, starts to wobble? The private cost of public laughter. Comedy is often described as honesty in disguise. The funniest comedians are the ones who risk exposing the tenderest parts of themselves. For Martin, much of his humor has been the result of an agility, an ability to turn pain into punchlines, to use pain as a lens for shared experience. But that process requires a container. If the container cracks, the process becomes hazardous. When comedians become angry, paranoid, or withdrawn, audiences often label them difficult. But consider what difficult really costs. Fewer sympathetic roles, less patience from producers, and a media apparatus that uncovers the worst in private and sells it as entertainment. What was framed as eccentricity can become a career liability. So the question returns: who protects the people who make us laugh? Are studios obligated to do more? And if so, what does more look like? Is it better contracts that mandate support, or is it cultural change that reshapes how we discuss public struggle? Of caregivers and co-stars. The role Will Smith played on the promotional circuit raised questions about how friendship looks in public. Will's gestures were small but constant, a steadying hand, a whisper of guidance, a shoulder touch that crossed the line between professional rapport and intimate care. Some applauded Will's attentiveness. Some wondered whether it was the right role to take publicly. When does public caretaking help, and when can it reinforce the narrative of decline? There are no easy answers. Friendship is messy, and what one person sees as support another may interpret as enabling. Yet when a co-star steps into a caretaking role, it complicates the way the public sees both men. It places one person at the center of vulnerability and the other at the center of responsibility.